Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and if you're sick of this series already, I am sorry, there is no escape. As always, today I'll be reviewing the death battle matchups most upvoted on my community tab. Please read the description if you want more details. And of course, you can guarantee your matchup gets looked at on the channel by joining as a channel member and submitting for our live ballot banters. That's just one of the many perks. Thanks to everyone who submitted so far for providing your amazing support. But if you're just here to hear about some ideas, by all means, let's get to it. First up today, Asta versus Natsu, Black Clover versus Fairy Tail. This was actually one of the matchups that I put in my top 10 death battle ideas for 2026 video, not because I thought it was going to happen this year necessarily, but mostly because I was thinking about it more and I wanted to bring it up. And yes, I was on the Asta versus Meliodas train like a few years ago, but I have more recently switched over to this one, and that's probably at least partially due to some kind of bias, because Natsu is one of my most wanted returning combatants for death battle, but even without that, I think this matchup just works really well on essentially every level, and I'm happy for the increased traction it's been getting. These characters both obviously deserve to come back to death battle, mostly because a lot of people can agree that their previous outings just weren't the best, relatively speaking, and of course with their magic or anti-magic capabilities, it really makes sure that both of these characters can show the full scope of their powers within the animation. And the best thing about this matchup, in my opinion, is that it offers a lot of questions of the limits of their abilities or the interactions between them. Like, is there a way to definitively prove what's better between Asta's anti-magic and Natsu's magic burning? Is one of those capabilities more limited by the power of the spell it's combating? And does that mean that could ultimately change who has the power advantage? Could we see any anti-magic capabilities going on there, or is that more off limits for them? I just think debates like that are so cool when there are so many questions to tackle, so this one really speaks to me in that way. And it's because of aspects like that that I'm honestly perfectly happy when it comes to the debatability itself, and the connections, while not necessarily all-encompassing, are still strong enough to more than prove why these characters should be paired together. I know some people don't really like this idea because the characters are just kind of annoying, which is one of the connections essentially, but I don't know, I just find that more funny if anything. And of course, there are tons of cool visuals and scenery to pull out with this one, definitely stepping it up from their previous episodes. So honestly, I just don't really see any huge weak spot with this matchup. I don't know if it would have made its way into my top 50 by this point, but it's definitely nearing it, and I think that says something. I am just really into this idea. Unfortunately though, I at least haven't seen Death Battle talking about this idea that much, so I don't really know how they feel about it. I don't know how soon it would happen on the show, and it might not stay popular forever. Some matchup preferences can shift over time. These characters right now do feel like they are among the most likely opponents for each other, so I guess I'm just hoping that it stays that way long enough up until the point Death Battle decides that they may consider doing it. So fingers crossed. Next up, Madara versus Raiden, Naruto versus Genshin Impact. Obviously, Aang versus Traveler is next up on Death Battle, and there are a few different opponents actually circulating around for Raiden. She seems to be one of the more popular Genshin characters being talked about in these discussions. But aside from Naruto versus Luffy, there honestly aren't that many huge Naruto matchups out there that Death Battle hasn't already done. So I don't really mind this one as a relatively newer Naruto matchup. I think it's pretty decent, honestly. It wasn't necessarily obvious, to me at least, but I do still think it has quite a bit going for it. I think one of its best elements actually is how it works thematically. There are definitely some good themes that can be found across these characters' backstories and their motivations to some degree. There are some overlapping abilities too, not too many, but I also understand that's not really the main focus of this particular matchup. And I do like the idea of characters with good intentions per se, but just being executed in some of the worst ways possible. Like, I just think that idea in general is cool and can make for some fun analysis content. And of course, the animation itself could be really dope. It could keep upping the ante across the battle easily, and I feel like they could find a good enough 3D model for Madara like they did for Obito and Might Guy. I feel like that would just be the best way to do this. So ultimately, I don't have a ton to say about this one. It may not be a favorite of mine on a personal level, but I do still find it to be a generally well-rounded concept. Even as far as the debatability, if anything, I think this has just gotten more debatable since it was first conceived, which means over time I do think it has just become a better matchup. And anything I can really criticize criticized this matchup for doesn't have anything to do with the matchup itself. Like, for instance, I feel like Raiden may have other opponents that can create a more unique death battle episode than this one, like Raiden versus Millennia from Elden Ring, for example, if that one works well enough. I also think that if anything, Aizen is the character that would benefit a lot more from coming back to death battle than Madara would. I feel like he already got some pretty damn good representation. Honestly, as much as I love the guy, I don't really know if we need quote-unquote Madara to get another episode, at least if there are other options that work just as well. But still, this matchup in a vacuum isn't half bad. I think it's actually pretty cool. Now, if we do get more Genshin Impact on death battle after Aang vs. Traveler, despite all the backlash that matchup's been getting, I do think Raiden could easily be next up, but I also think her opponent is not necessarily obvious yet. Like I said, she does have a few of them. Madara already, of course, got his main episode, so I don't know how much competition is really there on that side of things. So this feels like a generally easy matchup to do, but we just gotta know what the death battle crew likes. Maybe they want to do the Raiden or Raiden Battle Royale or whatever, who fucking knows. Moving on, Gwen Tennyson versus Adam Eve, Ben 10 versus Invincible. Some of you may remember that I did put this matchup in my top 30 most wanted death battles, and it's easily a most popular and a most favored matchup for both of these series, relative to some others where they definitely have more than their fair share of haters. This one's not doing so bad. And I honestly thought this was going to be the second Invincible episode that we were going to get on the show. Obviously, though, that didn't happen. And I am happy to say that I still really like it. Is it perfect? No, but simply put, it is perfect enough to me. I really like the image of an earthbound fight that still has a lot of spectacle to go with it. This animation could prove that you don't have to go ultra cosmic for things to get crazy and feel like they have a lot of weight behind them. I also think the combination of personalities here is pretty fun. It could lead to some interesting dialogue and interactions, generally speaking. I will admit that this matchup is not as debatable as I had thought or expected when I first started getting hooked on it, and I'll admit that's not amazing, but I still think there are some interesting questions to answer regarding how their abilities play off of each other, whether or not there are certain things that they can get past in the fight, and also, even more importantly, the other opponents these characters have are either less likely to happen or even less debatable, or both. So honestly, I'm perfectly fine just rolling with this one. It could still be great to have Death Battle talk about these characters' exact limits relative to each other, not just as far as their straight power output, but also the control they have over that power as well. They could go over stories that are more unique to them that wouldn't necessarily be brought up in other characters' analyses, and I definitely think they can take some liberties as far as using their powers in more creative ways than maybe they're known for. I'm mostly looking at you, Eve, and I think it goes without saying that the fight itself could just be visually stunning, especially as it goes on. So overall, everything just works for me. I guess it vibes really well is the right way to put it here. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, I feel like this matchup is nearly inevitable to happen on Death Battle. At least one crew member really likes it. It got a highly viewed Death Battle cast episode. I feel like this could easily be the next matchup for both of these series, probably around the time that Invincible Season 5 or 6 releases, or maybe after some major unforeseen Ben 10 development they'll decide to start working on it. But the point is, I really do think it is a matter of when, not a matter of if. After that, Captain America versus Ichigo, Marvel versus Kamen Rider. If you're anywhere deep in the community and you've never heard of this matchup before, I am so shocked. This is probably the biggest Kamen Rider matchup being talked about, except maybe Geats versus Nero by default now. Although even though I've definitely brought this up quite a few times on the channel, it doesn't mean I love it. There are at least 2 or 3 other Kamen Rider matchups that I would definitively say I like more than this one, and I actually liked it a little less before because to me it felt a little too forced than what I usually like. And while I still wouldn't say that it's amazing, I can see a bit more nuance within this matchup than I think I was able to see before. The connections definitely seem to come from more of a reputational and I guess inspirational angle, talking about the kinds of heroes they are relative to the other heroes that exist in their worlds, along with some similarities in their origins, which is also nice. It feels like it could be very similar to All Might vs. Might Guy, while also emphasizing more of their distinct distinct hardships, probably resulting in a bit of a more serious tone. I would be really excited to see Death Battle compare and contrast their various ideologies, but I think the main thing a lot of people would be excited for here is the choreography, because regardless of how they decide to portray this matchup and what style they use and whatnot, the choreography could just look sick as hell. It could be unmatched if the right amount of time is put into it. I don't think Death Battle could feasibly do this, but imagine if this was live action, with choreography as good, if not even better, than Blade vs. Buffy. Oh my god, like, just imagine it. If there's one thing, however, that I think is still very fair to criticize regarding this matchup, it's the debatability. From what I can tell, there are essentially no questions within this debate or comparison that aren't incredibly obvious or telling, even if you don't know that much about the characters. And as I've said before, I do hold Kamen Rider matchups to a bit of a higher standard, just because there are so many of them for some reason, and not all of them are great. Some of them honestly really suck, but obviously this isn't one of them, and it's also one of those instances where the stomp wouldn't really get in the way of the fight dynamic, at least not practically speaking, so I think you kind of just have to roll with this one, have fun with it, let the characters be flashy in their martial arts, because I do want to see more Kamen Rider get onto Death Battle. I want to see Captain America come back, and it's not like there are many other major characters lining up to fight Cap right now anyway. And if I'm being honest, I thought this one would have happened on the show by now. Death Battle said that Geats vs. Nero is their first dive into Kamen Rider research, so I don't really think we can expect this one to happen too soon, but because of the Death Battle cast episode and being on the champion poll and the general hype surrounding it, I think it's most likely that this would be the next Kamen Rider matchup after Geats vs. Nero. It would honestly feel kind of weird if it wasn't. Up next, Omori vs. Room, Omocat vs. Boisvert. This one feels like a long time coming. It is one of the biggest Kickstarter pitched fights ever, to the point where everyone knows about it and either really loves it or doesn't really give a shit about it. Now, admittedly, I didn't personally search this one out, at least not until more recently, so there are definitely other videos or people out there that would be better sources of information on this matchup, just talking about everything that it's got going on. But as far as what I think about it, I do find it to be quite inspired and very high concept in a good way. It doesn't seem to be all that debatable, but still fairly complex in its debate, if that makes sense. And even if it wasn't, I feel like this is one of those matchups where its fans really don't care how debatable it is, and I don't know if I can blame them for that. And not only does it have very strong themes, but also quite mature themes, which may not be for everyone, but I think if done right, would actually be interesting to see analyzed on this show. And on top of that, I feel like in order to do this justice, you really gotta go crazy with the presentation of every single production element, the animation, the analyses, the editing, literally everything just has to go insane. There's also some interpretational stuff going on in these series, which is always fun to analyze, let alone the emotional stuff going on. And I think it just goes to show that a lot of people want better written fights, not just the script of the analyses, but the actual fight script as well. I mean, look at Sentry vs. Superboy Prime. People really like that one, and this would naturally take that idea to the next level. Now, as with most matchups that are a little more out there, I tend to get a bit concerned initially about whether or not a literal fight animation is the best or most appropriate way to portray a scenario between two characters. Because I've seen a number of times that even though there are some matchups out there that definitely do not fit in this kind of setting, that doesn't stop a lot of people from still wanting them to become death battles anyway, which still feels very backwards to me. It really makes me question what we're doing here. Feels like a lot of people just want crossovers more than actual battles. However, with this matchup, I've come to the conclusion that while it may be difficult to pull off, if handled meticulously enough, it could turn out to be very good and unlike anything that we have seen on this show before. Just because some stuff would have to be done a little differently than normal doesn't mean that it is unworkable, and even though I may not be the target audience for this matchup, I still want to see more stuff like this, stuff that's different enough to make for unique experiences, but not so different that it's literally literally not a death battle anymore and just can't work. And I have said before that just because a matchup may get popular in this community specifically, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to happen on the show, but if there was one matchup that was going to happen just for that fact alone, it would probably be this one, to be honest. It's just exploded that much. And I also think Death Battle is going to want to do some pitches relatively soon to prove that it was indeed worth the time and the money, so we'll see. I still don't think it's a guarantee per se, but the traction that it's been gaining is also undeniable. Moving on, He-Man versus Shazam, Masters of the Universe versus DC. I'll admit, I didn't really have a lot of strong feelings towards this idea for a good majority of the time, and I've seen a lot of people try to give Shazam other matchups since Captain Marvel versus Shazam, I guess to give him something more appropriate, which I can't really blame them for. So I've seen characters like Pegasus Seiya and Thor tossed around, even though I may have my own personal reasons for why I don't want those as much. So for a while, I just saw He-Man versus Shazam as my default for both characters. There wasn't really anyone else I wanted so much instead of them. But even aside from that, I have gotten a bit more into this idea. The general connections here are pretty obvious, you know, the Superman archetype mixed in with the power fantasy transformation element, and plus them having superpowered family members is kind of cool too. And I would really like a battle with these characters that emphasizes how strong they can really get, at least more than their previous episodes, because I feel like that was something that was only touched on a little bit for each of them, so that would be really nice. I think the biggest difference between these characters is generally like how they act and how they speak, how they conduct themselves, their general vibes, and I feel like that could lead to either the most awkward thing in the world or the funniest thing in the world, or maybe both. And the choreography may be a little tough just because of their relatively more standard power sets, but I think if they take enough inspiration from their own media, they can create something that's still very fun to watch. Now, I actually thought that I had a bigger issue with this matchup before because I thought it was a little too close to being too redundant for my liking. Because Wonder Woman had already beaten She-Ra on the show, and because Death Battle confirmed that He-Man was only able to stand up to Superman because of his use of magic, I thought something like this was just a little too obvious based on what we had seen before. However, at least in some interpretations, Shazam is also weak to magic, or at least magic that can bypass his own magical defenses. Is it the exact same as Superman? No, probably not, but the sheer fact that that's also in the equation makes this so much more worthwhile in my opinion. It makes it feel like it's an actual question. And to be honest, even if that factor wasn't in here, it's still not the worst example of a redundant matchup that I've seen. It could still be different in the other qualities that it brings. And as far as the likelihood, I imagine that Skeletor versus Lord Zed would still be prioritized over this one, but they might not stop at just that. Masters of the Universe is back in the public eye more than it used to be. I don't really think the same can be said for Shazam, but whatever. And this matchup got a surprisingly well-viewed Death Battle cast episode, so there might not be a crazy demand for it, but I think Death Battle could just decide to do it if they really wanted to. After that, Ryuji Sakamoto versus Joey Wheeler, Persona versus Yu-Gi-Oh! This is one of those matchups that I was kind of introduced to through this series specifically, and I'll say there aren't many other Persona or Yu-Gi-Oh! Ideas that I really want right now, aside from maybe Ben versus Jaden or Tifa versus Makoto. Those ones are pretty cool, but I gotta admit, this one also kind of slaps, to be honest, and it surprisingly has a lot of elements that I look for in matchups like this. The series themselves obviously would invoke a crazy battle kind of just by necessity, regardless of which characters you use, because the worlds are so powerful with such great reputations. That alone I think would give us something wonderful. But even more importantly, because these characters' arsenals are different or in some cases more limited than their teammates, it's actually not quite as obvious where they would exactly scale relative to them, or which set of counters would ultimately end up victorious in this specific matchup. And the energy that these characters would bring and the interactions they would have would also be amazing. It basically has all the great elements of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Persona matchup while also feeling so different from the rest of them, and not being as bad in terms of predictability or redundancy, and I am just so here for all of that. Unfortunately though, there is just one little wrinkle when it comes to this matchup, which is, if I'm remembering correctly, Joey can't just choose to make his monsters real whenever or wherever he wants. And I'm I'm a little conflicted on this, to be honest, because on the one hand, I do believe that we should be analyzing and representing these characters as accurately as possible. I don't think that we should be allowing them to do things that they can't normally do just because it would make the debate more interesting or whatever. However, I do also believe that if Death Battle were to do this episode, they would let Joey use his monsters. Like, they wouldn't make the episode and then be like, as you could see in the animation, Joey couldn't do anything and therefore he died. Like, they wouldn't do that, right? At most, they would use that as a reason for why they wouldn't make the episode in the first place, and maybe you would agree with that decision. But if they do decide to make the episode, they would create an environment where both of these characters could use their normal stuff, where personas and monsters could fight each other. If you think otherwise, then I don't know what to tell you. That's what people would be clicking on the video to see. And because this matchup has so many other great qualities, I think I'd be able to roll with that premise for this. This doesn't really feel like a matchup that Death Battle would choose to do, at least not all too soon, but I would love to be proven wrong, honestly. Like I said, this sounds really cool. I do think that more of both of these series are probably coming, especially Persona, but Yu-Gi-Oh! I wouldn't be surprised if we see a bit more of that too. I just think there are other major characters or fights from both of those series that they would pick from and would probably choose over this one, but who knows? This would be really fun. And finally, Toph versus Terra, Avatar versus Teen Titans. Once again, this one's pretty topical. Aang versus Traveler is coming up next on Death Battle, and to clarify, yes, this is specifically the Teen Titans cartoon version of Terra. I assume there's nothing to do with Teen Titans Go here, but definitely nothing with comics, it's just the cartoon. And this was seen as Toph's main matchup after Gaara versus Toph, and honestly, before Gaara versus Toph. This was just seen as her obvious pick. And some people still seem to like it after all this time. My opinion is that it's kinda cool, but ultimately not my favorite. It's no surprise that this matchup gets talked about as much as it does, because it's just a very easy comparison to make, and I mostly say that in a good way. And I'm very happy that this sticks with the cartoon versions because it does make things a lot more debatable, and I have actually heard decent arguments on both sides. And as far as the animation goes, Death Battle can do a lot more these days with the environments and how the characters can affect them, and also the camera work, like following the attacks in various ways, or maybe even some POV stuff with the attacks. That could all be very cool. And I think there should also be a big emphasis on detailing their powers, like what their powers exactly give them, but also their interpersonal relationships. I think it's pretty nice when Death Battle can implement more of that kind of stuff into their analyses, and this would definitely give a good opportunity for that. With all of that being said though, and while I recognize this could be an enjoyable episode, it still feels pretty one note to me. The entire time that I've known about this idea, it's felt more like a way or an excuse to give Toph a matchup. Like if she had other popular opponents that had strong connections, I feel like this is the kind of matchup that would have gotten tossed to the side by a lot of people a long time ago. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say this matchup is bad. I think it's fine, and I can understand in a way if this is the best that we can do, but at the same time, I do really wish there was more to this matchup than what it has, more than mostly just young Earth manipulators with maybe some similarities in their personalities. That's the kind of matchup quality that would usually make me want to seek out other opponents for the characters, but there really aren't that many other major opponents for either of them, so I can understand why this is the one that we've all kind of landed on, even if that's not enough for me to love the matchup, but it probably is for a lot of other people, and that's perfectly fine. And usually I wouldn't think Death Battle would stick to just the Teen Titans version of a DC character, but honestly, that's how most people know who Terra is, and it does make it a lot more debatable, so that's one where I could honestly see them justifying it. And while the original Teen Titans show was not as relevant as it used to be, unfortunately, at least right now, Toph is not going to be fighting anyone else if she comes back to Death Battle, so I still very much believe this matchup has a chance for happening, even today. So guys, that's going to do it for this versus matchup review. If you love these ideas, great, and if you didn't, great. Keep an eye on the community tab if you want to help get fights selected for future episodes, or click the join button to show me your matchups for the upcoming ballot banters. Give this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more from the channel. Otherwise, make sure you have a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Peace out.